Thank you everyone for waiting and welcome to this online event from Pearson. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items so you will know how to participate in today's event. Before we discuss how to download any associated materials and use the platform, we would like to inform you that this session will be recorded for regulatory purposes and for our quality assurance. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to our presenter today anytime by typing your questions in the chat box, which is located at the bottom right side of your screen. You may also interact with the presenter on the same chat box, which is for sharing ideas with the whole group, and anything you type into this window can immediately be seen by the other delegates in the room. You may also use the same chat box for assistance in case you encounter any technical issues in viewing or listening to the webinar content. To queue for question, you can click on raise hand at the menu bar at the bottom, but if you don't see this, click on the icon labeled participant and select raise hand. Well, that's all I need to go through for now. Our presenter for today is Julie Hughes, so it's with a great pleasure that I hand you to her now. Thank you, and Julie, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey, and welcome to everybody to the first of our Back to Basic writing sessions. I'll explain in a moment why I thought of doing this, but I just want to go through the agenda, talk about what we're going to do today. Just a little introduction and welcome. I've got another slide for that, but I'll do it now. If you haven't seen me before, my name is Julie Hughes. I'm a subject specialist with Pearson Edexcel and have been for about 10 years now. I'm also a teacher. I usually do a couple of days a week. And I've been responsible for most of the GCSE English training for the last couple of years. I want to talk to you first. I'm going to go through a bit about writing engagement, how and why we should, how we engage students in the classroom and why it's really important. Then I'm going to briefly talk just a couple of little ideas for Key Stage 4 creative writing. And then I'm really excited to hand over to the wonderful Chris Curtis, who he knows he's a hero of mine. I live and die by his book, How to Teach English, which I'm always showing people. And he's going to talk you through some transactional writing. He's going to talk you through structuring, sort of the non-fiction side. So hopefully our parts of this session dovetail together. Hopefully at the end we'll have time for a Q&A and I'll talk you through what support Pearson offers should you wish to take anything further. I'd like you just to, if you can we have the poll, please, Geoffrey? Have the poll on screen, please. I'd like you just, if you could, to complete this little poll so we know where you're from, just out of interest. That would be lovely while I'm talking. So that poll is there. I've done that. I've done the introduction and welcome. And I will just wait for that poll. It looks like most of you have filled it in anyway, straight away. Brilliant. Okay, you can take the poll away now. We have done that. Thank you very much. Hopefully it'll disappear from the screen. Let's take that away. Thank you very much. Okay. Now, why did I come up with this? I'm going to quote here from Chris's book. Anybody think it's the only thing I read, actually? But as he says, some might say that writing is a dying skill, but if you look at the comments on a Facebook page or Twitter, you can see that there's never been a greater need to help students and adults communicate articulately with the world and think about the message they are presenting to others. And that really resonates for me because I have actually had students say to me that they don't really need to know how to write now, because to them, they just think that writing is long chunks of text and they don't need to do it anymore. They just communicate via TikTok and I'm just old fashioned. But I think we need, and I think, recent even political events have shown us how important it is how you present yourself in a written format. And the second one is teachers need to ensure there are lots of opportunities to write in lessons. And I certainly know that my own teaching experience in schools over the last couple of years, thankfully it's coming back to the fore, but has actually kind of squeezed out lessons where students just write, which I think is a real shame. And then the final thing is really, to me, sometimes the most important. It's that exam boards are increasingly requesting that teachers and students move away from using mnemonics like Forest. And we want them to focus on the communication of ideas. And if you like, I'd like writing to get back to that in the same way I did a reading event earlier in the week where I'd kind of like to get back to reading. I think it's important that we try and get back to actually what writing's for, and it is about the communication of ideas. So hopefully today, in my first sort of 20-25 minutes, I will be able to give you some ideas about how to sort of re-engage, how to get students more motivated and excited about reading than perhaps they are at the moment. Do please put any comments you'd like in the chat box. I find it a little bit difficult to maneuver the chat box and the slides as well. So Pam from Pearson's is in the background, and I will ask her occasionally if what comments people have made, and I'll be able to respond to them. But please do put your comments in the chat box. So simple strategies then, I've called this back to basics because I want it literally to be that. I always used to think back in the day when we went on sort of whole day courses as teachers, that seems to have gone by the board now. But I always used to think to myself, if I can come back with something I can use in the classroom tomorrow, then it's been a really useful day. And I think that's what I'd like you to be able to take away today, is that the things that Chris and I are going to show you, you can literally put into practice straight away. So here, and again, another one from Chris, he's going to get terribly embarrassed soon. We have to overcome the thought that all writing should be marked, assessed, and inputted into a spreadsheet. And that's really one of the most important things for me, really, is the idea that that we can take writing back from the exam, even, obviously all the way back down to year 7, and we can actually put the pleasure back into it. From a personal point of view, I can remember my own daughter loving writing in year 6 at primary school, and producing at the end of the year little bound books. She'd written a whole story, that kind of thing. And then getting to year 7, and that was slightly taken away. It was more, the writing had to be kind of for an exam purpose, and so she sort of lost that pleasure that she had in just telling a story. So I think it's really about how can we get back to that? How can we get back to the point where students think, do you know what, it's brilliant on a Thursday afternoon because we get to write. And that's what I kind of want to think about. So in terms of sort of strategies, one of the first ones is literally talking about writing, is literally, rather than sometimes even not writing something down in a perverse kind of way, but talking about stories and talking about how to write, I think is really important. This one is one of the most important to me, and that's writing without threat of judgment. Okay, so that idea, and I do the same as well with reading tasks, in terms of just saying something or just writing something without anybody judging what you do. And I think that's really quite important, that we get to the point, that we spend some time in the curriculum, or put some time into the curriculum, for students to write without anybody looking over their shoulder, and not write with the feeling that it might be wrong. I was at a school recently where they've gone back to the idea that I had when I was at school, and that's having jotters. So you've literally, the students have a kind of a rough notebook thing that they carry around with them, that they can just, write in without fear of getting it wrong. I think that's really quite important. Writing frequently is another thing, and I've kind of already mentioned that, really. The idea that we have squeezed out opportunities to write, even for exam purposes, it's very rare in a lot of cases that they spend one lesson a week writing. And I think it's very important that we try and get back to that as far as we possibly can. And the next one that I'm quite keen on is things like transformative writing. So in other words, how can we take one thing and make it into another? I think is quite a fun and useful thing to do. So I'm going to show you some things that would help you with those 4 things. And then, as I say, Chris is going to take you into more a non-fiction area. I'm going to focus on the fiction, really. So one thing that I picked up ages ago, I think it was on a course with Phil Beale, actually, was talking about writing. And I've done this lots and lots in the classroom. And this came about through 3 photos, a photo story I found online about a wedding that goes wrong. I unfortunately can't share the pictures with you because we don't have copyright. But if you do happen to have my email address and you want the pictures, please do ask me afterwards and I'll send them on. Now, the idea is that we no pens, this is no threat, this is keyword storytelling. So it gets back to the idea of, I know we're not actually writing, but we're telling a story. So we're doing it in a non-threatening way. And you literally give your students one of these words. If they don't know it, they look it up, they know it, they own it, they learn exactly what it means, and then you tell a story. So number 1 would use the word wedding. So it might be, it was the wedding of my dreams, I'd planned it for years. And then the next person has to use the word fled, and might say, all was brilliant, all was going well until he fled. And then the next person has betrayal and says, it was the greatest betrayal I've ever known. Then the next person has engagement, and so on. I've done this in the classroom quite a few times. It's good fun. It's good fun all the way down to, from year 7 all the way up to year 11. It's a good way of introducing new vocabulary. And I typed it up as we went along. And then we had the story printed out, and then we improved it. You know, we then start to polish it. We then start to improve the sentence structure. But it's great fun. It's a good way of introducing vocabulary, and it's a really good way of actually telling a story without threat. And what I tended to manipulate it so that students I knew that would be very nervous about speaking aloud came later on in the story, and so gained a bit of confidence. So it was good. So then thinking about writing frequently without judgment, it's I use a lot of images, and here's one, using starters like this for you know, for writing, for creative writing, is, you know, what are they saying? So again, either talking about it with a partner and then writing it down. I've done this with, you know, one is the camel with the red reins, and the other one is the other camel, and they've come up with a bit of dialogue. So again, it's that idea of doing it frequently, maybe 10 minutes every lesson, 10 minutes at the beginning of the lesson, just free writing, I found worked really well. And there's another picture here that I've used quite successfully, you know, will he dive, and if he does, why will he, and that kind of thing. And students I've found really engaged with that. They quite liked the idea of writing a story. And it made me, in a way, sad that I haven't done more over the years I've been teaching with creative writing, because for an awful lot of students, they really enjoyed it. And even those who weren't that good at the figurative language side loved the storytelling element. They loved the sort of getting into the plot and coming up with a good plot they loved. Then again, using images and expanding it out a bit more. You'll have to excuse my use of images has to come from the Pearson asset library of pictures that Pearson have the right to use, copyright. So some of my pictures might appear to be a little bit dull. You can find really exciting ones on the internet and use them in your classroom. Although this one actually, I used a couple of years ago when I was doing something on identity, and it was obviously around the idea of gender identity. And I was surprised because the students really enjoyed it in the classroom, actually. It really prompted discussions of, you know, of why he was, of why we're even surprised that he is cleaning the surfaces and she is on her laptop, was really interesting. And that led to really good kind of discussions of what happened before. And you can see here that I'm just kind of prompting a 3-part story structure, really, in terms of what happened. And they can discuss their stories, they can write it up, you know, and I find that really good fun. And then getting into the sort of more transformative writing. So if you like, even fun. This is, and I've slightly rewritten it, but this is one of the top 20 reviews from TripAdvisor. I've rewritten it for my own purposes, but I've used it a lot in the classroom, and I've used it in terms of just spag, you know, one of the corners. So this is a 4-corner. If you haven't seen this activity before, it's been around a while, and it's about having a big sheet. I do it on A3. I put a little text in the middle, and then they have 4 tasks around the outside. It works well for homework as well. So the top left-hand one is correct it, and then respond to it. Imagine you're the manager, write back. And then the one of I didn't do it on this one, but one I've done with this is make it into a story. So, you know, write a story about it. So again, you can do whatever you want in the 4 corners, writing wise, and students can have some kind of agency in a free flow writing lesson, because they can choose which task they want and work on it that way. Or you can do a sort of do one corner and pass it on activity. And I find that's quite helpful. And I find students really like the transformative writing. So I sometimes make it even more creative by putting any of these in the 4 corners. You know, I say change it into a poem, a 6-word story, a mini horror saga, a mini love story. And the M&S advert actually comes from an idea in Chris's book, where he does the M&S advert, you know, this isn't just any back to basics writing course, this is an M&S back to basics writing course, that type of advert. And he does it with Brussels sprouts in the book, and it works a treat in the classroom. So I've done it with lots of things, actually. And I find that is really good at explaining tone to students, because if you can say it in a, you know, if you can say it in an M&S advert way, then you can understand the tone of the writing. So the students love that. So again, transformative writing, a lot of fun, particularly in Key Stage 3, and doesn't take much preparation as well. You can like have that kind of lesson in your pocket for, you know, at the end of a topic or something like that. It can be brilliant. You can link it to the reading topics that you're doing as well. You can use your reading task, you know, your reading text, and transform it into something else, which is great fun. And then one of my all-time favorites is the 5 or 6 word story idea, which is nothing new and is supposedly, this is the original here, written by Ernest Hemingway. I'm never quite sure whether it is, but he apparently read an advert in the paper where these baby shoes were for sale, and somebody challenged him to make up a 6 word story on the spot about something in the newspaper, and he came up with this. That line, by the way, is also really good for punctuation, because you can write it out 4 or 5 different ways and punctuate it differently, and it slightly changes the meaning, and you can get students into punctuation that way. It's a really good, fun way of getting into punctuation. And then you've got a couple that I found yesterday. So I love you too, but again, another one there. That was one of the students I taught last year who we were doing horror. And then I have done it quite a lot, the 5 or 6 word stories with Macbeth. And that's one of my students from last year again, kills king, all goes downhill. And then this one is that other rarely taught classic, Inspector Calls, doorbell rings, equality enters. So it's a really good task to do on literature as well. It's kind of like a good summary task. It's good at understanding, and it's really good at getting to the gist of something. But it does make students love it in terms of being creative. You can give them a genre, and I did it with Key Stage 3 in the spirit of Ernest Hemingway with adverts. I gave them this is back in the day actually when we had adverts in the newspaper, but you can give them a sheet of a newspaper and get them to turn one of the articles in it into a 5 or 6 word story, and it's great fun. Then another idea, again, for just being creative in the classroom, and you can use it for improving vocabulary, is story mining. Now, this is something that a story that I wrote for a textbook, or the start of it, for a couple of years ago. And I do have the whole story, actually. If anybody wants it, feel free to email me. It took me a long time to write. I'm in awe of students that can write, a grade 9 piece of creative writing in 45 minutes was absolutely beyond me. It took me hours and hours. So the idea is with story mining, and you might have done it before, is you read the story or the paragraph aloud, and you give them perhaps a criteria of things to listen out for that they might use. So with this, I gave them the criteria of words and sentences. So I'll read it twice. The second time I read it, I want you to pick 3 or 4 words that you thought were really powerful that you could use in your story, and 3 or 4 either sentence starters or styles of question, okay? And I never show them it, they just have to listen. And most students with this picked out the opening, picture this, : they loved that. And they also picked out words, mainly the verbs, shuffles, hunched, dragging. And they also picked out the final, then Stella came along. And then what I do, this is the way the students did it in the classroom, they color coded it. Or I color coded it on the board according to what they'd chosen when I showed it to them. And then you can do one of 2 things. You can get them to rewrite it without seeing it, just using the words and sentences they've chosen, or you can get them to write their own in the same genre, using those things that they've found. And you can do that for nonfiction as well. So story mining, it's called, and it's a really useful technique for getting them to polish their writing. And then on the engagement side, just ending with one of my favorites is mini sagas. And I wrote this a long while ago, actually. And I've used it a lot in the classroom in terms of, again, just another lesson you can have in your back pocket that you can bring out. You can leave for cover lessons. It works really well. You can do it at the end of a topic as a sort of creative writing treat, if you like. Certainly I did at Key Stage 3. And I've done it also with students who are very gifted creative writers in year 11 last year. And I gave them different criteria. I said, okay, I want you to expand that into a short story. So you're going to write for about 45 minutes. And I separated them into 3 groups and gave them different criteria. I said, because I'm trying to focus their minds on planning on the most exciting thing. And one group, I said, I want you to focus on the sanction. So expand that part of the story. I want you in the middle to focus on the running to school as your main focus. And I want you over here to focus on the fact that it was Saturday. So they picked out the part of that mini saga and sort of developed it. And I got some fantastic stories, some really brilliant ones. And it was great because I was able to use the visualizer and show them. So that was fantastic. And again, it's one of those, if you get a couple of mini sagas, you can just have them ready And it's a kind of no planning lesson, really. So just 5 or 10 minutes on writing issues at Key Stage 4. So drilling down to something, if you like, eventually, obviously, we have to teach students how to successfully navigate an exam. So in terms of the main issues, writing issues at Key Stage 4, having looked at the examiners' reports across all exam boards, perennial things crop up, and I've put lack of planning in bold there. Certainly, Edexcel have now started including a planning box on their GCSEs, and they're starting to be used actually, which is great. Lack of structure is another one. Lots of baggy overuse of figurative language, with cliches like, my face went as white as cotton wool, and that kind of thing. I call it the walking lonely as a cloud kind of writing, with no real story or shape, and the lack of development. So that tends to be the kind of, if they're telling that story of the mini saga, they're going to start with their breakfast and take you equally all the way through their day. Or they're just going to touch on something in a description, but not actually expand the most exciting part of it. So it was how I got over that. And I was teaching it was actually a nurture group in year 9. And in order to help them develop their skills towards an assessment which involved a creative writing task, I came up with these 3 things. And I started using it then in years 10 and 11. And I said, look, we need to do, with every piece of writing, we need to plan it, shape it, and polish it. And I kind of, I said to them, that's what you do every time you say anything, really. You plan. If you're going home to tell your mum why it is you've been in trouble at school, on the way home, you're going to plan what you say. You're not going to tell her everything. You're going to shape it into what's best to tell her first. And then you're going to polish it up so that it all works, so that she isn't too cross with you. And really that plan, shape, and polish has became my mantra in terms of creative writing. So if we look at some slides here that might help in terms of if they have a picture, it's, the straightforward W questions to question the picture in terms of planning. And then the obvious favorite is the 3-part planning, which I do all the time, actually. Every sort of narrative task I do, I kind of steer the students towards the 3-part structure. And then once they've got that, what happens, set the scene, where are you, who are you with, why are you there, what's the weather like, and then what's the main point of your story, why are you even telling me this story, what's the main thing that's going to happen, or the main thing that you're describing, and then the ending, the resolution at the end. And then obviously starting to shape it with, are you going to start by setting the scene and then taking a linear route through? Are you going to start with the resolution and go backwards? Are you going to start with the main event and go outwards? And that works equally well for description. You're going to start there and go outwards. And I use these little shapes, actually, and the students quite like them. And then obviously you get into the more complex shaping, where you get into things like, narrative hooks. And I do overtly teach students narrative, 4 types of narrative hooks. And I find that they can handle, one of them really well. And that kind of becomes their sort of go-to story style or narrative style, which works quite well. And then other endings, obviously, endings being really important, being as important as the opening. I often do, with the story mining, I often get them to mine techniques and then they end another story. So I often start a story for students and they end it, or I start a description and they end it. So it's about how to end without that, dream. I woke up and it's all a dream, or they just end. That their description just goes nowhere, they just end. So it's how to end effectively. And really, it's about talking to students quite overtly about what people want from an ending. What we want from an ending is the baddie to be punished, or the goodie to be rewarded. And we want some kind of resolution. Even if it's a description, we need it to kind of go somewhere and end and be reasonably tidy at the end. So then when they've planned and shaped, that's when I get into polishing. That's the time. And a couple of tricks here that, again, this comes from a course I did with Phil Beadle, The Dog Barks, and it's been amazingly successful. I find that by the time I get to year 11, I don't sort of talk to students in terms of sentence types, complex, compound, etc. I find I do it in terms of sentence styles, and this is one that I expand. So I say, everybody write down the dog barked, and then we add various bits in and we change it around. And here's kind of some examples. So what can you do with the dog? Now, Chris, I'm going to embarrass him again by mentioning he's got some fabulous stuff in here about types of sentences. And again, you know, Chris isn't advocating we do long lessons on semicolons and complex sentences, etc. But his is more finding a good sentence in a book and using it, like the more, you know, the more the dog barked, the more my head ached, the more I wanted to go next door and muzzle him. So calling sentences by what style they are, and mining sentences and building them into your repertoire. I mean, I find with my writing that it does settle down into particular sentence types. So I've got a particular style. So I think that's a really good way to do it. Then two final ones, polishing punctuation, which is often the hardest for students to grasp, but again, making it more practical and giving them three. I did a whole topic on romance 1 February, which the students loved actually, and we did lots of reading about romance and writing about romance, and these were three of the sentences I came up with, or the ideas I came up with. So, you know, which one's the most romantic and why, so that you're brushing up their reading skills. And then also, which one do you think you can handle? You replicate it in your, you know, in your own way. And you can see there that I'm quite passionate about dashes and brackets as being a really useful punctuation type. Students love a bit of sarcasm and a cheeky aside, so I love those for improving and adding interest to their sentences. And then my final one is another one about sentences, obviously, and it's the classic, which is showing them one. They punctuate it, and then showing them how I did it, and then critiquing my suggestion. I must admit I do a lot of this because one of particularly with students who don't write naturally, I find that the longer they write for, the more their sentence structure slips. So I try and do a lot of starter activities around punctuation and around the difference punctuation can make and the purpose of punctuation in sentences, which I think is really important. So here you've got, this was a story about a lie. And it was somebody who stole something and lied about it, and how we can start it off and build up the tension and whatever. Another thing I'm going to end on, which is in Chris's book, but I haven't got a slide about it, and that is the one thing that absolutely changed my type of teaching of writing. And that was, instead of types of writing, like writing to argue, writing to persuade, etc., the idea of writing via what response you want from somebody. And I, for narrative writing, said, do you want to shock them or entertain them? Do you want to horrify them or please them? And so I would do a lot where I'd say, here's a paragraph that I think intrigues. I want you to take that idea and write it and horrify and start a horrible, you know, horrify the reader at the beginning. I want you to create empathy at the beginning. I want you to make the person feel guilty at the beginning. So that kind of thing. And I found that they liked that. They liked manipulating the reader into feeling a particular way, which is ultimately, to end on, what fiction does and what narrative writing does. So that's it, really. I'm going to stop sharing, but show you a slide there. You will get this PowerPoint, so you'll have Chris's blog details and his Twitter handle there. So I'm going to ask him to start now. Thank you. I think I've done exactly 2 minutes short there, Chris, from what I promised. So hopefully you're going to... I'll stop sharing. I'll go mute. You're going to start sharing. I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat as well. I think Pam's put a lot in there, but I'll have a look at that in the background for you. And I will stop sharing and leave it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, let me just get my PowerPoint. It's always technology, isn't it, really? That, let's see, fingers crossed it works. Okay, can we see that, everybody? Does that come through?
Yes, we can, Chris. Thank you. Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, right. Okay. Hello, I'm Chris Curtis. I'm going to just start off really, really quickly, and then I'm going to jump straight into it. I'm the head of English, but also I'm an acting, sort of still an English teacher full time. So I've been teaching all day, and so I'm kind of building on this is my experience. So it's about things that I've done, things that have worked, and also things that I've kind of been working on over the last few years. So if I just go through. So I'm going to talk about nonfiction. Now, I think what happens within the classroom is we love creative writing, but when it comes to nonfiction, it's always the dodgy cousin, okay, that we're kind of distant. It's like, yeah, we've got to do it, but do we really want to do it? And it's always the hardest thing that's always to teach. It's always the hardest thing to motivate students. And so there is a lot of problems around nonfiction. So I'm going to kind of talk about what those problems are and those misconceptions. The problem a lot of the time is that non-fiction tends to be, and in students' mind and also our minds, is that we focus on the visual appearance. So as long as it looks like a leaflet, we're happy. We're not that bothered whether it sounds too much. And the same with the kids, you know, they want it to look like it more than anything. And actually, when you see things about what happens in exams, is that actually the visual appearance doesn't matter. And actually, it's the style that's more important. And so what happens with students is they tend to list ideas, and they tend to lack that emotional engagement with the reader. And then they tend to waffle, because what happens in schools in every single lesson is they are writing some form of non-fiction. There becomes a default kind of, I call it kind of beige writing, which is one reason coastal erosion is bad is because of this.
I think you may have muted, Chris. Can anyone?
That kind of waffly writing is stuck in their heads. Then we've got this default style that I kind of mentioned. We've got this lack of crafting that's going on in writing, which again is all there. But also we've got a number of false friends that are there. So students tend to think, a bit like dialogue in creative writing, students tend to think that dialogue is great because it looks like you've written loads, but actually you haven't. And we all dread when we get a student that's written loads of dialogue because we're going, oh my goodness, okay, where is the description? And we get that with nonfiction. Statistics, interviews, and quotations are generally the dialogue. Okay, they seems like students have written a lot, but they haven't. And what they've done is they're false friends. And actually, they fool students into thinking, and they do go away thinking, I've done really, really well. And I've included loads of statistics and interviews, but it hasn't really moved the argument at all. So the problem is with nonfiction is that a lot of the time we're looking at superficial things in the students' minds, but also kind of in the teaching things. We write to try and make it look like that kind of thing, but you actually don't look at the basics. So what I'm going to do today is kind of talk about the basics and look at how we can improve writing around the basics. Now, the problem that we've got is that students are understanding about the subtext. And when they're making inferences in stories, they're so used to doing that. So they know that dialogue means something about character's attitude. They know a physical reaction or an object relates about somebody's relationships. Those kind of inferences are automatic because from primary school all the way through secondary, they're building those inferences all the time. So they know how to create a particular mood. They know how to kind of suggest things. And so that's why storytelling is quite more of a natural thing. If we look at how nonfiction works, now nonfiction works in a very, very different way because nonfiction works actually in quite a complex way because like all human beings, I can say one thing, but I can mean something completely different. And that's what nonfiction does. It says one thing and they mean something different. And actually, sometimes we can have two contrasting thoughts. And whenever we look at an exam piece, we can see that actually there are conflicting ideas and thoughts, and actually there are explicit thoughts and implicit thoughts and feelings that are going on inside the text. So really, we don't get students building on that implicit thinking and implicit thought. Now that's where tone comes in, because tone in nonfiction can create that kind of inference there. So there are 3 lines here that I've used a number of times, and you can see that really, really simple. As we go through these 3 different sentences, the inferences change. So I'm angry that you didn't invite me. I'm disappointed that you chose not to invite me. And look at that, the chose, that really accusing, that you chose, that's blaming, isn't it really? Rather than invite, chose, that means that they had a choice and put the emphasis there. And then the last one is that overly dramatic sort of thing. Words cannot describe how I feel. So I'm not even going to use those words because it's so bad. And that's what good nonfiction does, has that inference underneath the text and imply and trying to work array that sort of inferences. Now, that's what we want, ideally, with nonfiction. We want writing like number 3 that kind of really, really implies stuff and doesn't need to go for these big, massive, gaudy kind of techniques to try and get those ideas across. Now, here's a little something. You don't need to do it now, but a little bit something is trying to get students to create those inferences. So, for example, here we've got, a teacher's mug has been stolen, and I've used this a number of times with a number of different schools and a number of different students, is trying to build those inferences. So the police arrived to the scene. So how could we infer that they were not bothered about it? And it's quite interesting trying to get students to do this. So they might suggest, well, after they finished their cup of tea or after they, dealt with, some major issues, then they arrived at the scene. And then we can, each one of these is very, very simple of how we can infer something. So that inference skill, even though we're talking about writing, is an incredibly important thing that's going to improve their writing. And actually, what we notice with students that do well in transactional writing is that they are making inferences. They are constantly making inferences. It's not about the techniques necessarily, it's the inferences. And it's always the tone. The tone of nonfiction is really, really important. So how can we get students to be making those inferences? Well, first of all, I think what we need to do is actually look at the questions. And look at the questions and look at what it is about the question. So thankfully, Julie's given me a question, which is really an Excel question. So I can kind of talk about one of the questions that we've got. Now, transactional questions, they're very, very similar no matter what exam board that we've got. So here we've got one about competition. And I think sometimes, these transactional texts themselves are very, very vague, because actually what they're designed to do is for a student to latch onto any idea related to this. So this is where the problem comes, because students look at things and they see it and they get problematic and think, right, I've got to include this, 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 and this. And here's the question. Oh my goodness, what can I think of? And so what we've got to do is really kind of unpick their brains and the way that they think. And what I would say is the starting point for any piece of nonfiction should be one idea, a thread. Okay, now the problem is, and I think over the years, my problem is I've bombarded students. So you go, right, here's the question. Right, okay, give me 6 ideas that you can come up with in response to this question. What 6 ideas you can have? Go on, write them down the board. Okay, what if you're that student that struggles in English and you can see all these people that are coming up with hundreds of ideas and all you can come up with one? And that's what we want from all our students, to come up with one, because I argue that actually, if a student can come up with one idea, they can write a full piece. And I'm going to talk to you about how they can do that. So it's about paring back, because the problem is if we have so many ideas, what happens is the students list them. Okay, they list them, and really we want one idea and we want that developed. So let's have a look at it. So if we're looking about this, well, actually we can unpick. There are lots of threads. Okay, so there are threads with this one simple question. And because it's so vague, we could kind of talk about any of these different things. And actually, your ideas could be any of these. So you could take it from example as, what is the prize in sport? If we're talking about competition, okay, well, maybe we've got to look at, maybe competition isn't the thing. Maybe the issue is the prize. What is the prize? It's not the competition that's the issue, it's the prize. And so what we're kind of doing is look at that engagement that we can have there. There are a number of different things. So you can see that, we can talk about discrimination. I have a daughter with cerebral palsy. I talk about it all the time, but we can talk about it. And my own life experiences, I can say, well, actually, competition is discriminating. And so you can take it a number of different ways and the different things. And I think this is what we've got to show students is actually, do you know what? You can personalize that question. You can take it to you and you can think of you about where it's coming from you. So actually, it's about finding that thread that actually connects to you. And actually what happens is students try and think in their brain, go, competition, what can I think of? Ooh, where are these ideas? And actually, do you know what does it mean to you? What is your impact? And it's put the student in the center of the argument. So we can take it a little bit further. So what can we do then? So often what we see with students, and it's a bit like literature, is that students tend to what they do at the bottom end is they tend to just support ideas and they go, right, yeah, competition's bad. Here's a reason why. Here's a reason why. This is the reason why it's bad. And what we get with students who are at the top end is they explore that idea and they're a little bit critical with it. And so maybe there are things that we can do to support students to be critical. So actually really interrogate it. So instead of listing all those ideas, just go, do you know what? Competition is the wrong word, okay? I would say fight is a better word to describe this. Or we can kind of explore the context and actually go, well, I might be funny, competition is a constant part of life. Or we could actually say, you know, what's the inaccuracy here? Is, you know, competition right? Actually, it's too simplistic to talk about sport in terms of competition. It's not about that. It's something a bit more and a bit more detailed. So you can see how we can really, really change the ideas and actually get students to really form those ideas rather than just kind of working on going, listing all those ideas. So the problem that we have with students is they have lots of ideas. So we go an idea and this idea and this idea and this idea. So what we need to do, and I talk about polishing the pebble, is actually take one idea and really, really make it better. So once we've done all that thinking and we've pulled out a thread and we've kind of really argued and related to ourselves, is actually think of a thread for ourselves and really polish it and really work on it and making it better. I'm going to show you how we can do that structurally, writing, grammar, and the rules of structure. So instead of kind of talking about lots of ideas, we talk about one idea. So we go, this is my idea, so this, so this, so this, okay? And we have that development, because that's what we want. We want students to develop, not link. And that's the problem. They link all these different ideas, and we want them to develop it further. So what we do, and I'm going to take you through a kind of structured approach that we do with our students at GCSE, but also at Key Stage 3. So we kind of talk about it. So we start off with an idea, and so we're going to look at this idea here that you've got in front of you about homework. Okay, English teachers should have more time off lessons to mark mock papers, or homework is a complete waste of time. Describe a small speech. Okay, so we've got here homework punishes hardworking students. So what we then do is we kind of look at the emotions. So what are the emotions that we can come up with around this? Okay, so we start off with the idea of pathos. So, and I'm going to go really, really nitty detail about this, because what we can then do is we can start thinking in this issue, who are going to be my victim? Who is going to be my villain? As soon as we have a villain and victim on an issue, we have somebody to root for and we have somebody to care. And what we're getting students to do is position. To position in this argument, this idea, where are they going with things? So for example, we can start building this argument a little bit further. So if we have a look then now. So what I've got here is very, very simply pathos. So we've got three different things. Now, often what happens with students is they don't use enough nouns. And what they tend to use is they use the same noun. So for example, that question we had originally before was about competitive, being competing. So we will see that word a bazillion times in response. So what we've got to get students is actually saying, right, okay, look, you can have some other nouns that you can use. So it isn't just students, it's students who are victims, children, slaves. We can then move towards metaphor when we look at the choice of nouns that we use. You know, homework isn't just...
We've lost your PowerPoint.
Have we lost my PowerPoint? Sorry.
Stop sharing.
Okay, let me just, that might be my big fat fingers. Okay, let me just share now. There we go. Perfect. Is that better?
Thank you very much. That's
brilliant. Okay, sorry for that. Okay, so we can start talking about the nouns that we've got there. Okay, so we can see that we've got, okay, so we've got students, homework, and then obviously we've got the teachers. So the teachers can become tyrants, dictators, masters. And we're moving towards, in a way, metaphor, because we're talking about teachers being, you know, as masters and the students being slaves. So we're actually forming connections across the text through the use of nouns themselves. But also then what we can start doing is start linking these nouns to actually verbs. So if we can think about the students endure, suffer, and cope. Now notice that I'm giving threes because then we can start forming triplets and we can start building those in there. So the homework controls, dominates, and swamps, and the teachers inflict, force, and push. So we're adding to this as we go along. So often what happens is we don't craft with non-fiction. And so when you see a piece of non-fiction students, they tend to just focus on the same few words, the same few nouns, and the same few verbs. And actually spending that time working on who's the villain and victim, and actually the thing. What is the problem? Whether it's smoking, whether it's pollution, we need some words, and students need different words to talk about those so they're able to kind of develop those further. And then we're able to add adjectives in there. So then we've got, for example, the helpless, innocent, obedient students who are being this punishment that is futile, pointless, puerile. We've got this teachers who are heartless, thoughtless, and powerful. We're building those connections. So straight away, you can see that with those three banks of words, we're able to start forming sentences, we're able to form phrases, we're starting able to kind of have some connection between them. And then we can add a little bit further, because then what we can do is we can start thinking about metaphor and then building this up. So how we would do this in the lesson would be very, very simply, just kind of like working with these ideas. How can we work on this? What could we add to this? And then we kind of keep adding phrases as we go along. A bit like how we do with creative writing, we keep adding little bits and bobs. And then we can start personalizing it a bit further. So then we can start saying, well, Ben, a year 7, forced to spend his lunchtime working. So developing it further and working through it. But then once we've got those, we can start looking at the structures around the sentences, because we can start forming some sentences themselves and some paragraphs around it. So for example, we've got some of here, we've got opening sentences. Students cope, victims endure, slaves suffer. That in effect could be the structure of a paragraph. You've got those 3 different sentence openings, but you can turn them around and you can say to students, right, okay, what would be? Do we want to go shocking from the beginning? Okay, or do we want to mix it around? And we can actually play around with this. And so once we've got this, we can start looking at how to structure paragraphs and how to structure sentences. So we can start moving around. And we can say, right, let's start off with the student's coat. Then we're going to move to the dictator's push. And then we can have that mix in between subjects that often doesn't happen with some students writing. What they tend to do is they go, I'm going to talk about students. I'm not going to talk about other things. And then what we notice with good writers is they flip between, so they will go, this does this, but this does this. And because we've got on our little sheet there, this whole idea of the 3 different things, the problem, the victim, the villain, we're starting to manipulate sentences so that we can build those effects, those meanings, and we can think about how we can control it. Do we want them to be angry, or do we want people to feel guilty? And we can start manipulating those around. So then we can start turning them into sentences and then moving those sentences around. Now, you may want to, and I always use 3 sentences when doing nonfiction, because it helps, because what you're able to do, and I'll put it on a slide like this to say, right, okay, shall we move these sentences around? Is there something I can add in between? Okay, yes, we could have these 3 sentences on their own, but is there something that I could add in between those that would actually build up that kind of effect? Could I make us feel even more guilty? Could I make us feel even more angry about what the teachers are doing? And so we can slot sentences in there. And what I would get students to do is go, right, post-it note, right, give me a sentence that you would put between that student's coat and victims endure. And what that does is get them to think, right, okay, what could I put in there that builds up and works on that? So that's just pathos. So that's pathos. We start with emotion. Now, the next thing we do is look at logos. So logos is logical thinking. So we frame our arguments around this, and it doesn't matter what kind of transactional piece, we always go, right, pathos, logos, and ethos. When we've got logos, well, basically what we're thinking about is the logical consequences of this issue. What is the consequence of this idea of homework? So what are the consequences? Now, we kind of structure things in this kind of thought process. What's the knock-on effect? What's the worst case scenario? And what is the speculation? So what could we think could happen? And actually, those 3 things actually help students to understand actually what we're doing with nonfiction. Because actually, often what happens is students go for the worst case scenario, They don't think about what is the knock-on effect. So, you know, we might be talking homework. The knock-on effect is going to make people feel sad. The worst case scenario is people are going to avoid school. Speculative future, we may get to a point, and this is speculation, we talk about students, you know, what could happen, imagination. We could have a world where students are paid to go to school. And so what we're there then is we're thinking about building that argument, and we could talk about, you know, competition, that one we used at the beginning, and we can start talking about the sentences and phrases around these kind of things there, and actually structuring a paragraph around this concept of knock-on, worst case, speculative future. And so we can use some phrases, we can start talking about that, but then actually we can do something a bit further. We can start building that into a sentence. We can start talking about a structure behind it with the sentence structure, rules behind it. So we've got the impact of constant homework is clear. Unless it is addressed, we'll see record numbers of absences. The future is clear, a world where the joy of learning has died. And you can see very, very clearly how that is building up the ante, building up that structure. Of course, again, we can add some sentences in there, and we can see how very easily, by thinking about that, what's the knock-on effect, worst case scenario, what's a possible future. So that's how we could approach Logos in terms of that. But also there are other things there, because Logos is thinking about, well, what will happen? And so we can use conditional sentences, and so we can think if and then, or we can play around with if only if, even if. If we use those phrases, it's kind of looking at that kind of possibility and moving towards that. And actually that's adding to that tone that something could happen. Now we can even take that further, because we can talk about subordination, and taking subordination, we can say, unless we do something, until this happens, when we do this, or since this, we're able to kind of take that a little bit further and develop it. But then we've got ethos. So our pathos, we've got our logos and ethos. Now ethos, really, really important, because ethos is, well, why should people be listening to you? Why are you an expert on this particular thing? So, and this is where it becomes, again, what are the things that we are talking about when we're talking about this issue? So it's really about you, the reader, me, and the united front. So it's about understanding this relationship. And students don't do this. They don't do it enough. They always talk about me, okay, but they don't talk about the other person and try and connect it. It's generally, you say this, you think this. It's not about building that understanding. So what we try to teach students is them to flatter. So to flatter, to creep, but also think about themselves and be humble and show that level of humility. And we explore sentence structure and how we can show that through language choices. But then it's that teamwork. And so what we've got here are some very simple phrases and sentences we can use to kind of create that there. But underriding that is actually the use of pronouns and how students use pronouns in their writing. So we kind of sort of teach students, again, that 3-sentence structure. So 3 sentences around these kind of pronouns. So you, I, we, or are, you, we. So this whole idea of how you can shift the meaning behind the choice of pronouns, and giving students that idea that actually that pronoun is part of that signaling, it's part of that building that relationship, and it's part of what we're doing in trying to build that effect there. So for example, we've got this idea that, you know, you probably think that homework isn't so much of a problem. After all, you probably had lots of homework when you were my age. So you can see that there is that kind of relating it, talking to that. And then we've got, I feel that homework has changed to the point that's hardly recognized to the homework of your day. So we've got I, then linking back to you. And we would tell students to go, right, okay, keep bringing that you back into your conversation, because yes, I and you. So you're kind of building that connection. So it starts off with you, building that connection. And then finally, we've got at the end, we all want the best for the young people. We all want to push them to be the best they can possibly be. But what if we got it wrong? And so we're building that connection between that there. And it's all from pronouns. And so a lot of the time when we talk about nonfiction, we go, right, here's this technique, use this technique. This is just pronouns. And this is getting students to realize that if they structure the use of pronouns, and sometimes we'll say, right, okay, here are the pronouns that you've got. Write me a paragraph, and I want the pronouns in this particular order. Okay, this is the way that I want it to do. So I want it to do that. So it might start with an inclusive we at the beginning. Then it might have that accusing you in the middle. And then finally end with that inclusive R right at the end. But to show students that actually you can play around with pronouns to actually change the relationship that you've got, actually change the structure of your writing. And again, that 3 sentences allows you to kind of add to things. You can build it. You can say to students, right, what would we change? How could we? I would even give students this paragraph here with those 3 gaps there and go, right, okay, there's the basis. Let's change it. You've got a basic there, make it better. And what we're doing is we're showing, just by highlighting it very, very easily, some grammatical choices that they can make where actually it aids meaning. And as we've gone through this, we've been looking at grammar, looking at the choice of nouns, looking at choice of verbs, and looking at conjunctions, how easily we can change the writing. So then we can kind of build up something like this. So we've got pathos, we can start building. Tim does this, logos, imagine a world, ethos, and we're building that writing up. We're building it in layers. Now, what would I say for the top end students? What could they do? Okay, so very, very easily, the top end students, I would say, right, these are sort of things you need to be doing at the top end. So you've got to be kind of thinking about flaws, inaccuracies, contradictions, thinking about what can you do. And obviously you've got some phrases there about how they can really, really kind of really address those sorts of things. But it's those little tiny little things that help unpick that level of understanding. Right, nearly done. So a few key points really, okay. One idea, but develop it, okay? Let's not overcrowd students with non-fiction. One idea, and the idea is that they batter the reader metaphorically with that idea. They go through it. Get them to engage with the idea, reword it, rephrase it, change it, work on emotional level. Who's the villain? Who's the victim? Okay, add to the drama, okay? Place tone at the center of the writing. Make there a villain. Doesn't matter what it is, there will always be a villain. There will always be a victim. Who are the victims? Who are the villains? Whatever issue. Even that competition, there are winners and losers. There is a victim and there is a villain in there. False friends, avoid false friends. And another thing that we tend to see with writing for non-fiction is this idea of some of others. Students tend to be very, very good at general statements, big kind of like, some people feel this, others feel that. All right, we really need to get them into being precise and quite clear with it. And think about the structures in paragraph. Where do you want them to start with their paragraph? Where do you want them to end? And that is it, folks, okay? Now, I'm on Twitter, okay, and I do have a blog, so feel free, lots of ideas on the blog, keep posting them there, but do contact me if there's anything. I think we will share, won't we, Julie, this
Absolutely,
PowerPoint?
yes.
Yeah, so
absolutely,
it's...
Yeah, I have Chris's PowerPoint. You will get a PDF of the PowerPoint with Chris's slides on from today. I just wanted to say, Chris, somebody said, lots of people saying how wonderful it is. Kathy says, what about the bullet point in the marking criteria that refers to a range of ideas? And I kind of wanted to say on that I love the idea of one idea, because my point at the beginning was, what it tends to be is, if the article, as it was last year for Edexcel, is about write a speech about how to stay safe online, we got loads that just said, change your password, don't open phishing emails, don't fall for romance scams, everything. So it was almost like the board that you've done in the classroom written up. And I think what Chris is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, is that if we take one strand of that, so for instance, if we were to do a speech for your peers, let's imagine my mother, who is 86 and lives in a flat down the road with lots of other people who are also older, shall we say. Now, if I went to do a speech to her, there's no point talking about passwords, but romance scam. So that is my main idea. And then I'm branching off talking about different aspects of it. So that's kind of like my range, but I've narrowed it down into something that interests my audience. Would you agree?
Yeah, and Yeah, and I also think it's the problem is that it's the concept and idea. All right, it's the concept around the idea. What we tend to think is it's different ideas, and actually, what a range of ideas is say, for example, when you look at pathos, logos, and ethos, that is a development of ideas because, and it is a range of ideas because what you're doing is you're looking for the emotional idea in it. Then you're looking for the logical idea, which is right, the worst case scenario. That is an idea. And then you're looking at the ethos, which is, well, why am I the expert on that? So, and I think we get bogged down is that they've got to have lots of ideas and lots of different things. And actually, you know, what you see with students when it comes to writing is that that's where the weakest students fall down. They fall down because of that range of ideas. They don't do anything with those ideas. Now, obviously, at the top end, we might say we want students to kind of like look at higher ideas, okay? But really getting students to really think of one idea and extending that thought process, because within one idea, let's say, for example, homework, you know, the dangers of homework, by talking about that, you know, we're saying homework is bad because it makes students sad. If we're looking at you know, the next thing is the logos. Well, you know, the development of that is that, you know, we might have schools where no students go because of homework. They've been put off school. That is linked to that first idea, but also it's another idea as well within that. And I think it's, for us, it's that concept of idea. We tend to think of ideas being, you know, nebulous sort of different things. And actually, if you think about it, you know, what is an essay? Essays are usually taking one idea and exploring the nuances, the different, you know, pathways of an idea. I went over a bit there. Go on, sorry.
No, it's fine. You didn't. That's absolutely fine, Chris. Thanks very much. I think that's great. And I think what that buys into something that I'm really keen about with transactional writing, and that's actually thinking of your audience and connecting with them, rather than just putting everything down that isn't necessarily relevant. If you've lost them, you know, you've lost them. And I think that's brilliant. So I'd like to say thank you very much, Chris. Excellent. I'm just going to finish by sharing my screen because I want you to I want to end. There's Chris's details again there. Further support, when you get the PowerPoint, you'll notice there's links there to the resources that are on the Pearson's website, and you are welcome to use those even if you aren't with us. As American Airlines say, we recognise you have a choice. There's some details there about Key Stage 3 schemes that also Pearson have. And there are links to a fabulous podcast that Pam does, The Full English, where she's had lots of interesting guests. And there's a fabulous one there with Alex Quigley, who was on Tuesday, who was brilliant. And I know a lot of you have been asking for the video and the slides from Tuesday. If I could just say on that subject that I think
say that, Julie?
Go on,
Sorry
Pam.
to interrupt you.
Go on. Yep, go on. No,
yeah,
go on.
I mean, sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say, for those of you who are still here, that thanks so much for joining, but I don't quite know what's happened. It's the company that do the platform that send out the recording link. So we're looking into that, and we're going to send everybody who was here Tuesday and tonight the recording link for both events and the PowerPoint. That'll be tomorrow. So don't worry, you are going to get them. We've got your names, as they say, your names on the list. So we'll make sure you get those. So apologies for those of you who were here Tuesday and that link didn't work or you couldn't access it properly. Thank you.
Thank you. And but definitely these events have been so successful and so well supported that we'll definitely be doing something again in the autumn term. Thanks again to Chris. We're going to end the recording now and you will be put back into the waiting room. But thank you very much and hope to see you again in the autumn term. Thank you and goodbye.